Lesson 1.2 Integers. All integers are rational numbers because they can be written as a fraction where a and b are both integers, and in case of integers, the denominator b is always 1. Integers get larger as we move towards the more positive integers, and they get smaller as we move towards more negative integers. When we compare -7 to -5, we see that -7 is more negative. So it is smaller, it's less. -7 is less than -5. What about -1 and -5? -5 is more negative than -1, so it's more towards the left side. So -5 is smaller, is less. We can say -5 is less than -1, or we can say that -1 is greater than -5. So remember that this side is less than, and the side on this here is greater. Here we have to order integers in increasing order. Increasing order, sometimes called ascending, means that we start from the smallest number and we list from smallest to greatest. So the most negative is the smallest, and we can see it on the number line. -9 is the smallest number. Then we have -5, -1, then we have 0, and the rest is easy. Positive integers: 2, 3, 7, 9. We could also list the numbers with commas and increasing order. Now pause the video and use the greater than, less than, and equal signs to compare two integers. In the first question, we see that 5 is less than 9, and -4 is greater than -5. Pause the video and complete the question. Order the following integers in increasing order. So remember to start with the smallest integer and list them in increasing from smallest to largest. Pause the video, and when you finish, check your answer. In science, you will be looking at atoms. Atoms are tiny particles that make up everything. They are made of positive protons and negative electrons. Since atoms are neutral, the number of protons and electrons must be the same. So a neutral sodium atom will have 11 positive protons and 11 negative electrons. So what happens if sodium loses an electron? Sodium will still have 11 positive protons, but only 10 negative electrons. And positive 11 and -10 will not be equal to 0. So this will not be neutral. We have one more positive proton than electrons. So the overall charge of this sodium will be +1. You can think about it as each electron, each negative electron cancels one positive proton. So since we only have 10 electrons, they can only cancel 10 positive protons. So one proton will not be cancelled. And that's the charge of the sodium ion. On the other hand, if an atom gains a proton, so fluorine atom neutral will have 9 protons, positive, and 9 electrons. But if it gains 1 electron, so it still has 9 positive protons, but now it has 10 electrons. Each electron will cancel 1 proton, so each plus will cancel 1 minus. But since we have 1 remaining negative charge, this ion means it doesn't, number of protons is not the same as number of electrons, will have negative 1 charge. So negative integers are like electrons. If we start with 2 negative charges and then we add 5 negative charges, we see that we have 7 negative charges altogether. So when we're adding negative integers, the result is even greater negative integer. So if you owe $2, you have negative 2. And if you borrow another $5, then your debt becomes even greater. Then you will owe altogether $7. So negative sign means that you are losing. On the number line, when you're adding a negative integer, you're moving to the left. So we start with negative 2, and then we add negative 5. Negative means we're moving 5 units to the left. We end up at negative 7. So let's practice adding negative integers. Negative 3 plus negative 5 is negative 8. If you find it difficult, you can always draw the negative charges. So you have negative 3, you're adding negative 5, you have negative 8. Negative 3 plus negative 15 is negative, you have negative 18. Practice and check your answers when you're ready. Notice that adding 2 negative integers is the same as adding 2 positive integers. The only difference is your result is negative. Let's look at the next practice. A scuba diver is 50 meters below sea level. That means it's negative 50 meters. She then decides to swim 20 meters lower. Because she's swimming lower, that means this is negative as well. How far below sea level is she going to be? She starts at negative 50 meters. Then we can either add negative 20 meters because it's 20 meters lower. Remember that when we're adding a negative, the negative number must be in brackets. And negative 50 plus negative 20 is negative 70 meters. We could also start with 50 meters below sea level and subtract 20 meters. So you see that subtracting 20 meters is the same as adding negative 20 meters. When adding positive and negative integers, remember that one positive will cancel one negative because positive 1 and negative 1 always equals to 0. So when we start with positive 2, we have positive 2 and we're adding negative 5, we see that the negative and positive will cancel. The second negative will cancel the positive, but then there's no more positive to cancel. and we stay with the 3 negative charges. So 2, positive 2 plus negative 5 will give us negative 3. Basically, we have more negative signs than positive. And we can always use the number sign. So we start with positive 2. And if we add negative 5, we're moving to the left side. And we're moving 5 places to the left, so we end up at negative 3. Let's look at a few practice questions. 20, positive 20 plus negative 5. We have 20 pluses and only 5 minuses, so we know that our answer is positive. In this case, this is exactly the same as 20 minus 5. So once again, subtracting a number is the same as adding its negative. So 20 minus 5 is 15, or 20 plus negative 5 is positive, because we have more positive signs, positive 15. What about B? We have 13 minuses and 15 pluses. We have more positive signs. 15 minus 13 is positive 2. We know our answer must be positive because we have more positives than negatives. And one more example, C. We have 5 pluses, but we have 20 minuses. So in this case, we have more minuses. Our answer must be negative. And then we can subtract 20 minus 5 to find that we have 15 more minuses than pluses. So 5 pluses canceled 5 minuses, but then we're left with 15 negative signs on 15 minuses. Now please pause the video and complete the other questions, and when you're ready, check your answers. The coldest temperature ever recorded in Canada was in Snag, Yukon. It was 108 degrees Celsius lower than the hottest temperature recorded in Canada. The hottest temperature was 45 degrees Celsius in Yellowgrass, Saskatchewan. What was the temperature recorded in Snag, Yukon? So we need to come up with the equation. So where do we start? We know that the hottest temperature is 45 degrees Celsius. And the coldest temperature was 108 degrees Celsius lower. So we can either add negative 108 degrees Celsius, or we can subtract 108 degrees Celsius. So we see that positive 45 and negative 108, we have more negatives. So our answer must be negative. 108 minus 45, we can find how many more negative degrees we have. So 108 minus 45 is negative 63 degrees Celsius. Subtracting a positive integer is the same as adding its negative. So 2 minus 5 is the same as 2 plus negative 5. So we already know what to do. We have 2 pluses and we have 5 minuses. Each plus cancels 1 minus, and we are left with 3 minuses. So the answer is negative 3. So we start with 2, and then we either subtract 5 or we add negative 5. We are moving 5 places to the left, 5 units. When we move 5 units to the left, we get negative 3. I find that adding a negative number is much easier than subtracting the positive integer in many cases. For example, negative 3 minus 5, I would rewrite as negative 3 plus negative 5. And that's just like the first thing we did. We have negative 3, we're adding another negative 5, so that's negative 8 altogether. We of course wouldn't do that, we don't have to do it in question like this, because 100 minus 100 is just 0. We could write it as 100 plus negative 100, but there is really no need. But here we have negative 100 plus negative 100, and then we can much easier see that negative 100 plus negative 100 is negative 200. Again, in C, I would not change it to plus negative 5 because 35 minus 5 is simply 30. Now pause the video and finish the practice. And check your answers. The temperature of water in a pot is 78 degrees Celsius. How much hotter does the water need to be to start boiling? Remember that the boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius. So the temperature of water is 78 degrees Celsius, but we want it to go up to 100. So we want to find the change in temperature. How much does temperature have to change? Now, the triangle means change. It's a capital delta, Greek letter. So to find how much the temperature needs to change, we take the final temperature, because we want to reach 100 degrees Celsius, and we subtract the temperature we start with. We call it the initial temperature. So minus 78 degrees Celsius. We could rewrite it as 100 degrees Celsius plus negative 78, but we don't have to. So 100 degrees Celsius minus 78 degrees Celsius is 22 degrees Celsius. Notice that this is a positive change because the temperature must increase to reach its boiling point. Now, subtracting a negative integer is like adding a positive integer. Think about it like subtracting is like removing. So if you owe me $5 and I remove this debt from you, you will be on positive. So once again, subtracting a negative integer is the same as adding its positive. And of course, when we're adding a positive number, we are moving so many units to the right on the number line. So we start with 2, we subtract negative 5, which means we add positive 5, so we move 5 units to the right, and we end up with positive 7. So when you see this subtracting a negative, first thing you should always do is change this to positive. You will see in this next part that's because negative times negative is positive. So there is really negative 1 in front of the brackets, and this means it's multiplication. So negative times negative gives you positive, or subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So that's just positive 9. Again here, negative 95. We should right away change this to positive 5. So we have 95 minuses and only 5 pluses. So the result is negative because there's more negatives. 95 minus 5 is 90. So the answer is negative 90. And once again, 5 plus 5 gives us 10. Okay, continue with the practice and check your answers. And check your solutions. Kiki has $12. She needs $27 to buy a book that she likes. How much more money does she need to save? So we have to come up with an equation. We know that Kiki needs altogether $27. She only has part of it. She only has $12. So we need to figure out how much she needs to save. So $12 plus what gives us 27, or $27 minus $12 she needs to save $15. Nudin is climbing up 1200-meter high mountain. He starts 50 meters below sea level, so that's negative 50 meters, and then climbs 250 meters up. Okay, so let's start with the equation. He starts 50 meters below sea level. Then he climbs up, so that's plus 250 meters. He takes a break and continues to climb another 425 meters. So that's another plus 425 meters. But then he realizes that he dropped his lunch bag and has to return. So he has to return, so he goes down 205 meters. Then he continues climbing for another 485 meters. So up 485 meters. And this equation will tell us how much above sea level is Nudin now. So Nudin is 905 meters above sea level. Next, we need to find how much does he need to climb to reach the top of the mountain. So he is 905 meters above sea level, but he needs to reach 1200 meters above sea level. So what is the difference? Remember, triangle you can always use as a symbol for difference, change. In this case, it's h for height. And to find the difference, we can take the final height, which is 1200 meters, and subtract where he is now. He's at 905 meters. So he needs to climb another 295 meters to reach the top of the mountain. Now let's look at how to calculate the change or difference in temperature. So again, the triangle means change or difference. To find the difference in temperature, we start with the final temperature and we subtract the initial. So if we record the temperature at 3 p.m. and it is negative 5 degrees Celsius, and later we find the temperature at 11 p.m., so 8 hours after, is negative 15 degrees Celsius, we see that the temperature dropped. It dropped from negative 5 to negative 15. So our difference in temperature must give us a negative value. So a final temperature is negative 15 degrees Celsius minus the initial. We started with negative 5. So don't forget minus and negative. So 5 degrees Celsius, and remember that minus and negative becomes positive. So negative 15 degrees Celsius plus 5 degrees Celsius, and now we have a large negative value, negative 15, and a smaller positive value. So the solution, the answer is negative, and to find the difference, 15 minus 5 is 10. So the temperature dropped 10 degrees Celsius. And it makes sense. Negative 5 plus the change, negative 10, is negative 15. The traveling weatherman Hrundi measured the temperature in Toronto and recorded 1 degree Celsius. So we start, initial temperature is 1 degree Celsius. He then teleported to Sudbury and measured a temperature of negative 8 degrees Celsius. So that's our T2, or final. Find the difference in temperature between Toronto and Sudbury. First, you have to see that in Toronto it's positive 1. In Sudbury it's negative 8. So the difference must be negative because it's colder in Sudbury than it is in Toronto. So the difference in temperature, we can always say T2 minus T1, final minus initial. The final, Sudbury, is negative 8 degrees Celsius minus, this is positive 1, so minus 1 degree Celsius. And I would rewrite it as negative 8 degrees Celsius plus negative 1 degree Celsius. Because subtracting an integer, it's adding its negative. Negative 8 degrees Celsius plus negative 1 degree Celsius is even bigger negative, negative 9 degrees Celsius. So the difference in temperature between Toronto and Sudbury is negative 9 degrees Celsius. Let's try another question. The temperature was measured at 6 p.m. to be 12 degrees Celsius below zero. So be careful here. The T1 is not 12 degrees Celsius because it's below zero, so it's negative 12 degrees Celsius. If the temperature dropped, then we subtracting 13 degrees Celsius overnight. What is the temperature in the morning? So temperature dropped. So we start with negative 12 degrees Celsius. Now the temperature dropped, so minus 13 degrees Celsius. Make sure that you don't put minus negative 13, right? Because it would drop negative degrees Celsius if you want to use this. This would not be correct. Dropped, that's minus 13 degrees Celsius. So the new temperature, T2, the final temperature, is negative 12 degrees Celsius plus negative 13 degrees Celsius. So the final temperature in the morning is negative 25 degrees Celsius. And one more temperature question. The coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth was negative 88 degrees Celsius. The highest temperature ever recorded on Earth was positive 56.7 degrees Celsius. What is the difference between the highest and the lowest temperature on Earth? Okay, so we are looking at the highest temperature, the difference between highest temperature and the lowest temperature, and somewhere in between there is 0, negative 88 degrees Celsius. So let's start with the highest temperature, 56.7. The difference is subtraction, the difference between the highest and the lowest is negative 88 degrees Celsius. So 56.7 degrees Celsius minus a negative is plus 88 degrees Celsius. So the difference is 144.7 degrees Celsius. And now let's just make sure it makes sense. So the temperature between the highest and lowest, it has to go up to 0. So that's up 88 degrees Celsius and another 56.7 degrees. So that's 88 and 56.7. It is 144.7 degrees Celsius. And I must practice 14. The temperature in Sault Ste. Marie changed from negative 12, so that's T1, at 8 a.m. to negative 2, that's T2, at noon. Calculate the change in temperature. So we want to know if the change is positive or negative. So let's quickly see where we are. So we start from negative 12. And then we go to negative 2. So it goes towards 0. So we see that it's getting warmer. It was negative 12 degrees Celsius, and now it's warmer, it's negative 2. So our change must be positive. So how much did it increase? So the change in temperature, I find it helpful to know that it's T2 minus T1. So final, always what we end up with, minus what we start with. So we end up with negative 2 degrees Celsius minus negative 12 degrees Celsius. That's negative 2 degrees Celsius minus a negative becomes plus 12 degrees Celsius. We have 12 pluses, but 2 minuses. So those 2 minuses cancel 2 pluses, and we stay with positive 10 degrees Celsius. That means that the temperature increased 10 degrees Celsius. So when you answer the question like this, you shouldn't just say it changed. You should say, be more specific, it increased. So temperature increased 10 degrees Celsius from 8 a.m. to noon. Next, let's look at appreciation and depreciation. So appreciation indicates the increase in the value of a property over time. So if we get a property at certain value and its value increases, that means that it appreciated. But if we buy a property and its value drops over time, then we have depreciation instead. So both appreciation and depreciation are changes in the value, but the appreciation is the positive change and the depreciation is the negative change. And of course, when we buy something, we would like the change to be positive. We would like our property to increase in value. In general, most items that we buy depreciate in value. For example, all electronics, the value will depreciate over time. If we buy a car, its value will usually depreciate, drop over time. Like in the example with when Gloria bought a car for $38,000, but after 5 years, she could only sell it for $25,000. So you see that its value dropped. So there is a depreciation. Again, to find the change, we take the final amount, $25,000, and we subtract the initial original value, which is $38,000. And minus means adding a negative, so our result is negative $13,000. That means that depreciation is $13,000 for the car. So the car lost in the value. Let's look at practice 16. Jaewon bought a house for $450,000 and 5 years later sold it for $795,000. So you see that the value of the house increased. It almost doubled. How much did the house appreciate or depreciate? So to find the value that the price changed by, we have to take the final value, $795,000, and subtract the initial value. So the difference, it's positive because this value, the final value, is higher than initial. So the house appreciated, its value increased by $345,000 after only 5 years.